my God, your bowel movements have been horrible and you've been having diarrhea and what you ate before was fine. And you're like, oh, metformin, oh, I take that. And oh yeah, I've been having loose stools ever since and I can't eat citrus and I drink any bit of alcohol. It's even worse. Oh, alcohol slows that down. So then you cut out alcohol and you go to your doctor and you switch off metformin to a different form and now your diarrhea is gone.
There's a thread running through every cell in your body, a whisper in your genome, tension between what you inherit and what you activate. Now, today's guest, Dr. Ben Lynch, has spent decades pulling on that thread, not to unravel us, but to weave together something wiser. Genetics on its own isn't the answer. It's the beginning of a much deeper, much more beautiful question. Let's dive into our conversation with Dr. Ben Lynch, where we reveal a StrateGene leveraging his decades of experience as a functional med doctor.
Dr. Ben Lynch is a pioneer in the field of epigenetics and nutrigenomics, best known for his best-selling book, Dirty Genes. He empowers people to take control of their health using personalized strategies like nutrition, lifestyle, and supplements to work with their DNA, not against it. Originally trained in cell and molecular biology at the University of Washington and later earning his doctorate in naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University, Dr. Lynch shifted his focus to genetics in 2008 after discovering the transformative potential of epigenetics. He went on to found Seeking Health, a company that provides high-quality supplements and education support around genetic health. Known for making complex science actionable, Dr. Lynch is a sought-after speaker and trusted resource for both practitioners and health-conscious individuals worldwide. Dr. Ben Lynch, it is my absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to Outsmart Your Genes.
Awesome. Thanks to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, my pleasure. I mean, this is our second time having a conversation of this nature, and I'm always excited to reconnect and learn and hear what you've been up to. And well, just to, kind of fill our guests in who might be hearing from you for the first time, wanted to start, as close to the beginning as we can around your journey into health. So you've been called a trailblazer in genetic health and functional medicine. So what caused you to dive into and discover the dirty genes, so to speak?
Well, it was multiple steps, but one that pops to my head right now, and the answer to this probably shifts every podcast because, again, there's multiple steps. But the one that really hits me is I remember I was in a clinical shift at Bastyr during my training, and I was in the environmental medicine shift. And environmental medicine is where you essentially work with patients who are exposed to things like mold or chemicals, pesticides, herbicides. Their occupation may be, we had a guy that worked at the ferry terminal and he was in one of those booths that you drive up to and pay all the time. And we're working with him because he was exposed to, car exhaust all day long. And, you don't think about these things until you're an actual patient or you work with them. And so I was working with these patients, and if somebody had high heavy metals for various reasons, we put them on this protocol. If they had, mold, we put them on this protocol. If they had exposure to fuel exhaust or diesel exhaust, we put them on this protocol. And I did this long enough where I saw some patients improve, say maybe 60% of them. So that's good. Then I saw maybe 20% of them, no change at all. They just stayed the same. And then 20% actually got worse. And I was trained by my parents, and maybe just inbred in me, that you're not happy with your wins. You're wondering why your losses or your failures aren't working. And to me, a 60% success rate was pretty crap. And so I was always asking my, professors and supervising docs was like, well, why aren't these patients getting better? Oh, it just happens that way. It's like, well, that's a cop out. And so there was one thing in particular that stepped up for me. And that was when we were chelating heavy metals out of these patients. We used a compound called DMSA. And DMSA works really well at chelating metals. And I remember my supervising doc saying, well, some patients do really well with this. Some people get a red rash and some people have difficulty breathing. And so I witnessed this in some of my patients, and it was horrible because here they are, their counts of heavy metals are dropping, but their side effects are so bad that they have to stop the treatment. And other patients are just fine. They just plow right through the DMSA treatment, and heavy metals drop, and they're like super happy. So I did some research, and it's like, well, DMSA, what's going on here? What's the mechanism of action? How does it work? This is before Google. Or no, Google was Google around? I don't even know Google was around. Huh. Wow. There they aged me. And so I did some digging, and DMSA is a sulfur compound. And then I did more digging, and I found out that sulfur, if it accumulates, it can lead to hydrogen sulfide gases and problems in the body. And then I dug some more, deeper, and it's like some people have overburden of this or deficiency of molybdenum. And I was like, oh, molybdenum, what's that? I was like, okay. And then I asked my supervising doc, do we ever give molybdenum? No. What's that for? It processes sulfur because we're giving high amounts of sulfur to these patients and et cetera, et cetera. So we started giving molybdenum to these patients, and lo and behold, their side effects just tanked. So they improved much better. And then others still had issues. And then I went and worked with a leading environmental medicine doctor in the world, Dr. Bill Ray, Environmental Health Center Dallas, which is now, I think, still going, but he's passed. And he was amazing. And I remember working with him. He had his protocols too. And I was like, Doc, again, some of your patients are getting better, some of them aren't, and some of them are worse. And he goes, yeah, but we can't help everyone. And that's true. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, what about genetics itself? Because the cofactor of molybdenum is an epigenetic control. And I was like, okay, well, let's dive deeper into genetics. But the whole genome, I think, had maybe just been discovered. I forget the year that happened. Do you remember, Jeremy, when the whole genome was discovered?
Yeah.
The genome project?
Yeah, whole genome sequencing project. That was around the time I was doing my PhD. So it was 2001. I want to say when it really kind of kicked off and got done. And I remember it being published, closer to 2003, 2004. So it was really the early 2000s where it came to light. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's right around. So that was just so I graduated in 2007. So yeah, it just kind of been done. So genetic testing back then wasn't a thing.
Mm-mm.
So, and I don't fault these health professionals at all. I mean, they were doing great work. They were doing pioneering work. And I was just wondering why these other people weren't getting better. And so that's when I turned to genetics. And it also helped explain my own health issues. And so, because when I started diving into my own health issues, like, oh, I have this genetic variant, and the result is this, the consequence is this, the vulnerability is that, and this is how you mitigate it. And then I started playing with my own health and, due to the genetic variations, and it really helped. And I remember when I think it was Genova Diagnostics came out with their detoxification panel, and I talked to the guy who actually helped design that, and it was pretty much a nonsense panel. It looked pretty, like a lot of lab tests. A lot of us will order a lab test and we'll put a lot of faith into it, but at the end of the day, it's just a PDF, and it was designed by a human. And so just because a report looks pretty doesn't mean it's actually useful. And a lot of people get suckered into fancy looking PDFs and fancy looking terminology. And it the same as with genetic reports. I mean, people also fall prey to that too. And I'm not saying that all people who make these tests are doing it in a way to prey on people. I'm just saying that it takes a lot of work to make a laboratory test and the type of report that goes with it to be extremely practical, actionable, useful, and accurate to the extent possible. And it is something that we all struggle with, and there's something called the innovator's dilemma, which ties in with this, and it's not easy. And so I do think in our industry, Jeremy, that there are a lot of genetic testing companies that aren't doing it very well. And I also find that the people who are reporting genetic variations to customers and serving a particular audience are doing a horrible job. And it's painful for me to do that. And I honestly wanted to walk away from the genetic side of things because I believe that the epigenetic side of things is so much more powerful than focusing on the genetic variations, that after a decade of playing with genetic variations, like, you know what, it doesn't really matter what genetic variations you have, as long as you do this, this, and this, and this. It's still useful the knowledge, but it's such a pain in the ass to try to provide healthy, good information for people. So I wanted to walk away, but then I keep getting pulled back because people are getting hurt by utilizing the information that they're getting from these genetic reports, that they're applying it to their own life. And like Dr. Lynch, I have MTHFR. I'm taking 15 milligrams of methylfolate. I'm having panic attacks. I've been hospitalized 3 times. This is a true story. And she just followed me on TikTok and I was like, well, what's going on? And she goes, I said, when was the last time you didn't have a panic attack? She goes, about 3 years ago. I said, okay, so you're telling me you didn't have panic attacks until you were put on the methylfolate? Oh, yeah, I guess so. I said, well, talk to your prescribing doctor, stop taking the methylfolate. Just because you have an MTHFR genetic variation does not dictate that you need 15 milligrams of methylfolate, doesn't dictate that you need any methylfolate, because you might be getting sufficient amounts in your diet already. So there's a lot of that.
Right. Well, and so, your book, Dirty Genes, goes into that, right? This concept of, born dirty versus made or acted dirty. And I think that's kind of what we're teetering on here, is there are certain things that, let's say predispositions that they're not your fault. They're just what you have. And then there's certain things that you've done that you may not know or you've been exposed to. And so, what has it been like to kind of, straddle that now that place that you're in is the behavior genetic side, because it is the behavior ultimately and the environment also that affects the epigenetic component. But, you kind of honed in on these, dirty genes, so to speak. So, maybe just to get a little lens into your thinking around, why these genes and then how do, these protocols like, soak and scrub, as you've outlined, and in a way, what kind of StrateGene leads us to, because, this is something that we're working on right now is, taking that very thoughtful report that's on the other side of the innovator's dilemma and getting it in the hands of more people. So, how is that report different? And, what can people expect when they see it?
Yeah. So let's talk about the typical genetic report that I've seen a lot of. And typically what happens is somebody will run their genetics. They'll use sequencing or self-decode or 23andMe or Ancestry or DNA Fit or whatever they use. And then they get a report. And the report typically is, they talk about heart, and then they'll list, a variety of different genes with the variety of different genetic variations that are associated with those genes. And then they'll show if it's, heterozygous, homozygous, or wild type, typical, normal. And then they will give a statement of what they should do about it. And oftentimes it's take this particular supplement, avoid this particular supplement, consider this medication, avoid this medication. And that's kind of what people see. And then they do. And then they get confused because they might have one genetic variation that talks about take methylfolate. Then they have another genetic variation that says don't take methylfolate. They're like, well, what the hell? I have one gene variation that says one thing and the other one that says it contradicts, and I can't do it. So now I'm left with no action to take because now I'm just lost. So does it nullify it? What how do I interpret that? And then another thing is some genetic reports are just literally laundry lists of all the genetic variations that they can identify. So, for example, MTHFR is a gene which has a job to do, and its primary job is to make methylfolate in the human body. And it's also another job is to regulate upstream folates into being conserved and maybe doing other types of things. So we all think that MTHFR, again, one particular gene, its primary job is to make methylfolate, and it's a big one. And methylfolate is the body's primary form of folate in our blood. By 80% of the folate in our blood is methylfolate. But the other 20% of that is other types of folates. And MTHFR helps regulate how much of that folate comes through as well, which is very important. And so there are, I forget, if you look at a website called Gene Cards, I love Gene Cards, and Gene Cards will say that there might be, say, 1,500 different genetic variations in the MTHFR enzyme, in a gene. And we talk about two, the MTHFR 677 variant, and we talk about the MTHFR 1298 variant. And some genetic reporting companies get all excited and they're like, oh, there's 1,200 different genetic variations of MTHFR. We're going to be leaders and we're going to report on 30 of them. And so now you have this long list of MTHFR genetic variations, and you find out if you're heterozygous, homozygous, or wild type. And then people will think, oh, the more genetic variations I have in my MTHFR enzyme means the more problematic it is. And that means I need more or less methylfolate. That's how they interpret it, because our reptilian minds want to oversimplify things. And my reptilian mind wants to do the same thing, but it's wrong. And customers think that more is better. When you go to McDonald's, you say, supersize me. And with genetic reporting, it's the same thing. Get me more SNPs. Why are you only reporting 1298 and 677, Dr. Lynch? That's when other companies are reporting 30. Is there any published research on the 30? I don't know. But why aren't you reporting it? Because there's no published research. Plus, a particular gene by itself is not very useful. A gene is interacting with other genes. And so there's about 18 to 20 some thousand genes in the human body, which is interesting to me, even though we've done the Human Genome Project, that we cannot pinpoint an exact, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jeremy, we cannot pinpoint an exact number of how many genes are in the human genome. Is that true?
Well, I mean, I don't want to go too philosophical and go too high level, but it depends on how you define a gene, right? And so, and then how many variations of a gene are there with alternative splicing? And what are the, and so the intronic regions that didn't code a protein, let's say, do they have some role to play? So yeah, when we think about how we have traditionally classified genes, it's, does this DNA sequence encode for a protein? And so you're in that range of the 20 to 30,000. But of course, that's changing. And not to go too far on a bender, but you're seeing this resurgence of long sequencing of long reads, for example, because that gives you all kind of insight around the transcriptomics, which gives you insight around how, these expressions, these transcripts are differentially spliced, for example. So, if we go back to our university textbooks, yeah, you're still going to see between, say 20, 30,000. But the thing that's most shocking to people is that, that's only accounting for about 30% of the genome. So 70% is junk, i.e. doesn't encode for proteins, right? So I think you're circling on a very important point, not to cause too much dismay to people, but these definitions or our understanding of what genes are or what our functional genome is changing and becoming more clear with more and more research. But let's zoom back into, the StrateGene report specifically and why this, kind of signal of these, say, 7 critical genes as it relates to the phenotype of interest in the StrateGene report are actually giving people a jumping off point to better health.
Yeah. And it's StrateGene was an evolutionary tool, and it was actually not even meant to be a tool. It's, I literally, you hear about how businesses were designed on a back of a piece of notebook paper or a napkin. Mm-hmm. And StrateGene was essentially the same way. because when I was doing research on MTHFR and when I was working with clients who had the MTHFR genetic variation, I noticed the same trend as what we started talking about. 60% got better, 20% got no benefit, and 20% got way worse. And I was thinking, well, if they have an MTHFR genetic variation and the MTHFR genetic variation reduces the function and the ability for them to produce methylfolate in their own body, and I give them methylfolate, they're supposed to be getting better. But some aren't, and some are getting worse. And why is that? So I wrote MTHFR on a piece of paper and I circled it. And then I went to some other websites and I said, okay, after MTHFR produces methylfolate, where does methylfolate go? It goes to the methionine synthase enzyme, this complex. And what happens then? Well, it utilizes methylcobalamin. Okay, so I write methionine synthase, MTR, MTRR, and I circle that. And I write B12 on it. And I write methylfolate next to MTHFR. And then I say, well, then I read another research paper and said, oh, by the way, the cofactor for the MTHFR enzyme is vitamin B2, riboflavin. I was like, what does that mean? Well, if there's sufficient riboflavin, then the MTHFR enzyme, regardless if it has a genetic variation or not, can perform better, because MTHFR genetic variation actually predisposes it, especially in heat. So if you have a fever, it can't make methylfolate. But if you pound high levels of riboflavin at the patient, according to Dr. Bruce Ames, then that cofactor binding problem that it has will actually succeed, and the MTHFR enzyme can now produce methylfolate. It's like, oh, so I write vitamin B2 riboflavin on this bubble that I have on my piece of paper. And so then I started giving people riboflavin, and I started looking at methylcobalamin. I started looking at their labs and the organic acids for riboflavin and methylcobalamin and MCVs and MCHs and serum cobalamin, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a higher success rate, but then I still had problems. And then I was like, well, people talk about high homocysteine in MTHFR, so maybe I should look at homocysteine levels, and why is that? And so what enzymes are involved with that? There's CBS and MAT and AHCY. And I was like, oh my God, this is too much. So then I same piece of paper, I start putting these genes down and all their vitamin and minerals that are needed to help drive the enzymes, the things that influence their function. And then I started utilizing that with patients. And again, incremental and improvement. I'm now not at 60% getting better. Now I'm like at 69 or 70.
And actually, important to clarify here, getting better from what?
Getting better results with my clients.
Right. But why are they coming to you in the first place? Stress, anxiety, pain, like what?
They're coming to me in the first place because they've realized that I have a website called mthfr.net. And so what happened back in the day was I got pounded by a lot of individuals who tested positive for MTHFR genetic variations. I shouldn't say tested positive. Mm-hmm. They identified that they have an MTHFR genetic variation, and they wanted consultation and support. I had a lot of free information, and still do, on mthfr.net, so they wouldn't have to call me, but a lot of them did. And they were scared. And you think you're broken if you have a genetic variation. You literally think you're broken. And the first time I found out that I had MTHFR genetic variation, I thought I was broken. So these individuals would call me and say, I have all these plethora of symptoms, and I have the MTHFR genetic variation.
Right. And what are the symptoms?
Well, the symptoms could have been anything. It could have been cancer. It could have been, anxiety. It could have been insomnia. It could have been joint pain. I mean, the thing is when you have a plethora of symptoms, or we all have just a primary symptom that really bothers us, and then you identify you have a genetic variation that appears to be significant, mm-hmm. you immediately look for causes and want to blame your symptoms upon that thing. Mm-hmm. And then you want to fix it. Mm-hmm. So regardless of what people came to see me with, they ultimately came to see me because they had the MTHFR genetic variation. It didn't matter what symptoms they had. And then they blamed their symptoms, and so did I, on their MTHFR genetic variation. And so we thought then that if we support their MTHFR genetic variation, because it's such a big deal, that they will get better. And then after just a few months of doing this, I quickly realized that, man, you can't just put blinders on, because there's 18 plus thousand other enzymes going on in the human body. We need to zoom out here. And so that's what StrateGene is. StrateGene is a compilation of thousands of research papers and looking at gene to gene interactions and a lot of epigenetic controls, meaning how these genes are influenced from environmental exposures, because was my original specialty. And then nutritional biochemistry, what nutrients support these particular enzymes, because genes make enzymes, a lot of them. So what cofactors are needed. And then you you create a pathway. So because if you are supporting one particular gene, like the MTHFR, and you either provide methylfolate or vitamin B2, then methylfolate will be made. Well, then you need to follow that methylfolate. And where does it go? Because it's a domino effect. If you swallow methylfolate, it's gonna go places. It's gonna do a lot of things, and you need to know where it's going and what it's going to be interacting with, and you need to downstream effects of that. And StrateGene, as far as I know, is one of the fewest, if not the only, genetic report that provides you what I call pathways, so you can see a flow of genetic variations, how they can stack up and lead to increased vulnerability or decreased vulnerabilities. And then at the same time, you can quickly spot epigenetic influences that give you direct actions to take. And that's why it's called StrateGene. It's strategic genetic analysis is what it essentially stands for. Because when you look at StrateGene, you can develop a strategy that is precise and targeted, and you know exactly what steps you're going to be doing and make a plan. And will the plan always work? No, but you can then look at the pathway, and then you can make another plan, and you can troubleshoot. And some things just make absolutely common sense. If you have a genetic pathway of, say, the histamine, like we have in our histamine report in StrateGene, and you see a lot of genetic variations in the ability for you to break histamine down, and then you look up each of those genetic variations, and you find that each of these genetic variations in your histamine report are slow, meaning that your ability to clear and break histamine down is reduced, then you're like, wow, that explains a lot. That explains my high histamine symptoms of irritability, difficulty falling asleep, allergies, menstrual migraines, et cetera, seasickness, car sickness, and ringing in the ears, and what have you. And then you look at the nutrients that support those particular enzymes that those genes make, and you're like, oh yeah, my doctor said I was deficient in this one and this one and this one. And so then you go and you actually take those nutrients, because now you really see how important those nutrients are to break histamine down and get it out of your body. And so then you go and do that, and you actually had a 50% improvement just from doing that. And then you see that maybe the DAO enzyme is reduced. The DAO enzyme is really, really important in breaking down histamine, and it's on the StrateGene pathway. And so there's cofactors and nutrients for that. But then you're taking metformin because you're diabetic, or maybe you're a biohacker and you're taking metformin to lower your blood glucose even more. And my God, your bowel movements have been horrible, and you've been having diarrhea, and what you ate before was fine. And you're like, oh, metformin, oh, I take that. And oh yeah, I've been having loose stools ever since, and I can't eat citrus, and I drink any bit of alcohol, it's even worse. Oh, alcohol slows that down. So then you cut out alcohol, and you go to your doctor, and you switch off metformin to a different form, and now your diarrhea is gone, because you have a tool that you can just continually reference. And a lot of people look at a genetic report and they think it's one and done. It's like, oh yeah, you go to a doctor and it's like, you have the MTHFR 677 homozygous variant, reduces your capacity of your MTHFR enzyme to function by about 70%. So that means you have a potential, for reduced methylfolate and potential for higher homocysteine. And that's knowledge that you just live with, and you put the report down and you walk away and you don't never look at it again. With StrateGene, health professionals, every single time their patient comes in for years, they'll have their StrateGene report in their file, and they will pull it out every single time. And because, as you know, as a patient, we all have patients, and we go to our doctor, and you have different signs and symptoms depending on the time of year, the time of age you are, what have you. I mean, you might go originally because you hurt your knee, and then you found out they're really good at gut health, and then later on now you got eczema problems, or now you can't sleep, and now you got hormonal problems. Well, with your StrateGene report and your health professional who knows how to interpret it, you can pull that in along with your signs and symptoms, and you can create a strategic treatment plan based upon your current signs and symptoms, looking at your gene interactions, the genetic variations that you have, and then things that are going on in your life, and you can make a plan. And there's 6 or 7 different pathways. There's a folate pathway in StrateGene, there's a histamine pathway, there's a dopamine pathway, serotonin pathway, there's a methylation pathway, and there's a glutathione pathway. And biopterin is in there too. And so it was like, well, I don't really know what dopamine does or serotonin does. Well, you learn. And we have accompanying resources that go with that. And we have supplements that also support a lot of these different parts of the pathways. But we're very, very careful in not recommending supplements out of the gate, because a perfect example is some people could be taking metformin and they can have all these high histamine symptoms, and they just stop the metformin and they switch to a different med and they're good to go. And it's been a very, very helpful tool. It is harder to learn, but if you want to have a tool that actually gives you lifelong pointers in what decisions that you should make in order to optimize your health or to just treat certain problems, along with your healthcare professional, StrateGene is a tool that you will use for the rest of your life, and you will always be referencing it. And it's doctors are just loving it. And I remember when I first did a conference at Bastyr in 2011 or so, talking about these things, I showed a very rudimentary picture, I think, of my notes and all the different genes. And there was about 300 different health professionals in the audience. They're like, we want that. We want that. Can you make that for us? Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, crap. And that was the birth of StrateGene right there, because I literally just showed my chicken scratch, and my notes are like, oh, that it summarizes all these key things in one piece of paper. And it's cool because it's endless information. And I still, even though I made the report, Jeremy, I still find things that blow me away. So for example, I was working with someone, or I was just doing a presentation on folate pathways somewhere, or on vitamin D deficiencies. And I was like, low vitamin D reduces your absorption of folate. I was like, how did I not see that? Because I have, vitamin D deficiency slowing down your SLC19A1 gene, or your DHFR enzyme, or forget which one, but it's right there on the StrateGene report. And I've just completely missed it. So if you're low in vitamin D, your ability to absorb folate goes down. And we're not talking genetic variations here. We're talking what influences your particular genes in order to function. So genetic variations can actually improve the function of an enzyme. A genetic variation could do nothing to the function of an enzyme. And a genetic variation can actually support the function of the enzyme. So that's all good information. And that's why I have it in StrateGene. But you also have what things in the environment influence that particular enzyme to function better, what, i.e., cleans it, and what things reduce its function to perform. So it can't do its job, which, i.e., dirties it. And so you have the best of both worlds with StrateGene because you have the genetic variations, which are actually researched and published and talked about in National Library of Medicine. And we provide you as much detail as possible. They are common genetic variations. They're not life-threatening. They're common. So that means that they're going to be in the population. And so the likelihood of you having a genetic variation here could be pretty high, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be a problem for you, especially if you're doing things that clean the particular enzyme, which are right there on the report, so you know. And then if you're doing the things that are dirtying that particular enzyme, and you know that, you can stop doing those things. And so oftentimes also I love this part. There was the folks would schedule an appointment with me and I would go over their genetic report and I'd look at it and they're essentially, they didn't have MTHFR genetic variations. So there was none. And they were disappointed. They were disappointed. They're like, I swore my problems, my symptoms of X, Y, and Z, my cardiovascular disease and my high homocysteine, because I have my MTHFR genetic variation, but I don't have it. I need to retest it. It's like, no, it's a very reputable lab. You don't have an MTHFR variation. Well, why is my homocysteine high? Why am I struggling with cardiovascular disease? Well, there's a lot of other things going on, but your MTHFR enzyme could actually be problematic because you don't have upstream folates, and you could be low in vitamin B2, and you could be low in methylcobalamin, and low in glutathione, and low in B6, and then so I pull out the StrateGene report and I show them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, there's a lot of other factors at play," and then we do an organic acids test, and we just give them some riboflavin and B6, and then stop them overtraining. Some people were just overtraining, which then skyrockets their homocysteine. So we do some lifestyle stuff and retest their homocysteine, and it's fine. But they're frustrated and they're pissed off that they don't have a genetic variation to blame their symptoms on, which then they can take a supplement for. And a lot of people actually want to identify which genetic variations they have and then map that to which supplement to take. And so if you have 10 different genetic variations in your genetic report, you could be taking 10 different supplements. And a lot of reports do this. And it's great for business for that supplement company. And it's horrible for the individual on the receiving side of that. Long-term, short-term, they're relieved and they're motivated. And they readily buy those supplements because they think that they're fixing their genetic variations. And this is what really pisses me off, Jeremy. And this is why I'm still in the game of genetic report providing. And that's why I've partnered with Sequencing. And that's why I continue to offer StrateGene. That's why I continue to refine it and make it more practical, because I get so pissed off at people preying on victims to sell a genetic test, to sell their supplements. And there's some huge names out there that are doing this. And it's got to stop, but it won't stop because there's such a huge market for it. And then they go and they publish their testimonials of how this famous person improves so much by doing their protocol. Meanwhile, 70% or more of their customers are struggling and feeling worse, but they don't talk about that. They drown out the negative reviews by these really famous people who are getting good positive outcomes. And it pisses me off. And so that's why I'm still in the game. And Dirty Genes is a fantastic place to start. So it's Dirty Genes. Actually, let's back up on that for a second. My publisher wanted me to call the book 7 Deadly Genes. Why do you want to do that? She goes, oh, it'll sell copies. It's like, yeah, but these aren't deadly. I'm not talking about, genes that if you have a genetic variation, certain ones, you can actually die in utero. You can die before you're born. Or let's say you're born and you have a mitochondrial genetic variation it can be so severe you're dead in a few days. Those are deadly genes. And I'm not going to be talking about how MTFR is deadly and COMT is deadly. That's nonsense. And so I was talking through this, and the lady who helped me write the book, Rachel Krantz, bless her heart, it was the last book she ever wrote. And she just kind of whispered dirty genes. And I said, excuse me? She goes, dirty genes. I was like, oh my God, that's perfect. That's perfect. So I dedicated the book to her because she and I would argue all the time about how to write this book. And so anyway, I kind of lost my point. Oh, 7 deadly genes and dirty genes. There's genetic variations that will indeed kill you. And there's genetic variations that may be problematic for you and they may not be. They simply increase your vulnerability. And StrateGene looks at genes that have common genetic variations, and they may reduce its function, they may improve its function, and we present those for you. And we do it in a way that actually empowers you to make a decision rather than fear. And Dirty Genes is a book that is empowering. It could have been very disempowering, call it 7 deadly genes, but I didn't want that. I love empowering people to make decisions for themselves. My kids are very independent. It's just how I parent, and it's also how I practice medicine. Is I want to empower people so they can take, the information they have and make an informed decision and feel good about that, and then walk away and produce it. And so, if you're looking for a place to start, I highly recommend reading Dirty Genes first, because if you go to genetic testing first, what's going to happen is you're going to get overwhelmed and you're going to get scared and you're going to say, well, how do I fix this particular enzyme? And that's not how it works. And so Dirty Genes will teach you how, essentially how your body works. So then when you do get ready and motivated to order genetic testing and work with sequencing and StrateGene, then you're going to be looking at it in a different lens. And you're going to be excited to know, after you have the backbone knowledge from Dirty Genes, how to work with your StrateGene report. So highly recommended to do it that way.
Amazing. It's a complex thing that I would say you've done. You continue to do, as you pointed out. And, that is some indication how, I would say, complex we are as humans, but even the complexity of the understanding and how we come to it is very much interdisciplinary. So you've got different people speaking different languages, right?
Yep.
You got a naturopathic doctor says one thing. You've got your specialists, docs, say in, breast cancer or colon cancer, speaking another language. Your GP speaks another language. And, there's, the universal language, right? As we're learning, our genetic code is, something that, more and more what we're seeing is more and more people taking interest in it. And so how can we, as I would say, stewards of that code, act more responsibly and towards this, thematically, in terms of, partnership, like this partnership between you and Sequencing.com, and, also in the spirit of the pursuit of the truth and empowerment, right? So, the reality is the Dirty Genes that we know and love today, it's only going to improve as more people use and understand, and as the field itself advances, we get a bigger picture. But the word and the name of the report, beyond Dirty Genes, the name of the book being multiple layers there. Even the name StrateGene is like, look, it's the way you use this as a strategy depends on what you want to do. And
right.
What you want to do is going to depend, in large part, obviously, on where you are in your life and what your goals are. Right. And so, I think about how I use it in, my family, and this is a much longer discussion, that's for sure, because, you talked about the innovator's dilemma, right? Let's assume for a moment a pure heart. And, I want to give this insight to the customer, and I call it an insight because I think the real product is not the report. It's the people doing awesome things. That's the product. And the way we think about products tangibly, I've changed my paradigm of thinking around that is, it's not a physical, tangible thing. It can be reduced to a service at the end of the day, a software as a service, right? It's a report as a service. It's to assist you in climbing that mountain. It's like, so, how do we position, the industry and the suppliers of products to be maybe a supplier of servants, like Sherpas to climb Mount Everest? What do you need? I'll show you where the chasms are. And at the end of the day, you need to find your own way. You want to find your own way. And you have that personal agency. And so even just the notion of making DNA more approachable, like you and I both studied molecular biology, the big words don't scare us. And, it's like, in some ways we develop our own kind of Einsteinian mechanism of, learning to not engage certain things. Like when Einstein was asked his phone number, he didn't know it. He said, "Why don't you know your phone number?" Well, I have more important things to think about, right? So sometimes it can be so overwhelming, like from the, let's say the listener's point of view, it's like, I do just want this one answer so I can just, see and get to that end. And then you realize you're like, oh my gosh, this is a whole new world of things I don't understand. But the nice thing is StrateGene isn't an ending, it's a beginning, right? It's a beginning into, well, again, that, kind of universal code. And, now it being in the context of the Sequencing.com platform, there's, the possibility for the evolution of the product through pulling in the whole genome sequencing. And then, that bolstered with software updates like HealthScan and always connecting to the latest peer-reviewed literature. But as you probably know, the founder, Dr. Brandon Colby, he has been on this journey because, he was diagnosed with a rare disease, but never knew the root cause. And that's actually where Next Gen Disease Screen comes from, is his first instance and, resolution around the source of his epidermolysis bullosa simplex was actually in an instance of, two rare alleles coming together in the recessive form, right? Which highly, highly unlikely. Both his parents were carriers, they didn't know. And then it came together in that recessive form. And so, but once you have the root cause, now you can start to plan accordingly. So it's not about blaming your genes. It's about knowing, what path you might be going down if you are just completely passive. But no, here's some tools. And, I think we're going to be constantly looking at, how do we improve education? How do we improve ease of access and interpretability and helping folks get to, a more, let's say, clear picture of where to start, and I think StrateGene, is a great place. And, Dr. Lynch, one of the things I mentioned at the top of our call, I promised you I'd come back with, my 3 favorite questions. Number 1 is, what's our key takeaway here? Like our one-liner of empowerment for people, and who are the people that need to hear that? That's number 2. And number 3 would be, who would you nominate as our next guest?
Yeah. So give me number 1 again.
What have we been saying? What's the big takeaway here for listeners?
Yeah. So the big takeaway is our reptilian mind wants to simplify things because it conserves dopamine, it conserves energy, and that's what we are designed to do, because when we actually lived in the wild hundreds of years ago, we needed to be very, very mindful of that. And when we have to overthink and think, then we are burning calories, we're burning, dopamine up, and we're expending and making ourselves more vulnerable. And so we are attracted towards reports that say, if you have this genetic variation, you do this. And if you have that genetic variation, you do that. And that's what we want. But want and need are very different. And I want you to understand that you need to have a tool that it burns up more dopamine. It challenges your thinking, and it encourages you to understand and dive deeper into understanding how your body works. Part of the reason I became a naturopathic physician is because I was failed by conventional medicine multiple times as a kid and a young adult. So I said, screw this, I'm going to go to med school. And I became a health professional and doctor for my own selfish benefit. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. But it was extremely expensive financially, time, etc. But it was the best thing I ever did. And now, well, besides being a father, that's pretty damn cool. if by you having struggles by ordering your StrateGene report, trying to learn it, we have tons of resources for you to help you learn it. But if you invest your time in understanding StrateGene, the amount of success that you have for the rest of your life is going to incrementally increase. And if you order what you are tempted to order, and that is genetic reports that just give you spoon fodder of do this and do that and do that, and you're being told what to do. You've heard the famous saying, you can feed one person by giving them a fish, and you can feed them for one day by giving them a fish, and you can feed them for a lifetime teaching you how to fish. So I am the teacher to help learn. You're going to learn how to fish by getting StrateGene. So that's the ultimate thing.
Right.
So don't fall prey about what you want. Dig deeper in identifying what you actually need, and you need a strategic plan. So StrateGene is there for you.
Amazing. And your nomination for our next guest?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot. Bruce Lipton would be fantastic. Bruce Lipton was a huge influence on me, and he wrote the Biology of Belief. He's retired now in New Zealand. I don't know, maybe you've already interviewed Bruce Lipton, but he's what I would call the kind of the father of epigenetics. He definitely influenced me that we shouldn't just look at genetic variations. We should look at how the environment responds to things. When he gave a beautiful example of, and in one of his talks, and I'm going to butcher it, he's way more eloquent speaker than I am, where our eyes are what influences our genes to work. And so we look at the environment, we see beauty, our enzymes and genes will perform a certain way. If our eyes or ears or other senses identify danger, we just immediately turn on other genes. So if I yelled fire or there's an earthquake, you'd feel this flood of adrenaline, right? Well, what happened? That was an instantaneous release of epigenetic influence upon your genes and enzymes working immediately. And so Bruce Lipton, I think, would be a fantastic guest.
Amazing. I'll do my best to track him down and see what I come up with. In the meantime, Dr. Ben Lynch, thank you. You've been so generous with your time. We've gone way over. I do appreciate you making this effort and being the teacher and connecting people to this resource. So I thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. As we've seen, this thread is real, this DNA that runs through us, and we've seen the outcomes. For example, we've seen the panic attacks. We've seen these calmed by curiosity, and the mothers empowered by understanding their DNA, and the quiet shift from prescription to participation. So that is the individual, in effect, having a conversation with their expert health team and bringing DNA into that dialogue. So the question now isn't whether your genes matter. We know that to be true. The question is really, what story are you writing with them? So who are you becoming in that process as you learn to listen? So thank you so much for your own curiosity as you dive in to discover your own DNA insights, your life's code, and effectively learning how to work with and outsmart your genes.